Okay, so good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Karthikeyan. As an environment science teacher in an alternative school, having joined at the age 27, with a lot of ideology, thinking one is walking a different path and all kinds of expectations of one's students and stuff like that. In all these years, there have been a handful who have actually walked differently, I must say. When Krishnamurti was asked about the Krishnamurti school students, he said they're disgustingly successful. I say the same thing, that most people have embraced mainstream and fallen into the world of capitalism and stuff like that. Very few have actually walked a different path. So for me, my great pleasure is most of those who have walked a different path are in this room today. Like Krishnapriya here, Joseph is here, Karthikeyan is here, Sharman is here, the current students are here, all are here. So it gives me great pleasure that everyone is here. Of course, when you're teaching, you never know what the student's life is going to be like, what's going to happen, what are the pressures that's going to take them, where is it going to take them. In this guy's case, I could say, I know where it's taking him. Like when I first met him as a class 8 student, I knew the heart is in the right place and it will do the right things, So right from that time, we have had a connection. And he has walked his life, I would say, quite wisely and radically. Indian Express reporter, Times of India reporter for many years. He didn't pursue money, he just stayed in one job and then very, very interesting things all along. And now it has been doing research on women farmers and climate change. And so for this thing, he was the automatic choice to call. So he had a few choices, and finally he has chosen to speak on Maldharis and the solar panels that are coming up in their region. So with this, I will hand over.
Thanks, Anna, for the introduction. As you can see, I'll be talking about the impact of large solar parks. We've heard about the impact of climate change, but this is one case of how the solution to the crisis can also be problematic if it's not thought from ground up, and you continue to have a centralized way of transitioning to cleaner energy. Just to give a brief introduction to when and how the solar revolution, as the government likes to call it, started. In 2015, India signed the Paris Agreement saying that the country will do these three things. The first point is to have 40% of our electricity come from renewable sources of energy. They've clearly put non-fossil sources, so it could include large hydro or even nuclear power. So this is where it all started from. The second half, you can see the updated INDC. INDC is intended nationally determined commitment, to ensure that the world's global average temperature doesn't go above 1.5 degrees. So since that announcement, this has been the rate of growth of solar energy in the country. It grew from around 2,800 megawatts in 2014 to about 44,000 megawatts, which is a 1,500% jump. If you remove solar panels from this equation and consider other sources of renewable energy like wind, small hydro, biomass, and waste to energy, the growth has been only 80%. So the target for renewable energy was the 175 gigawatts by 2022, of which the government decided 100 would come from solar. Of this 100 gigawatts from solar, 60 would come from large solar parks and 40 gigawatts from rooftop solar panels. So this is the overall growth. But unfortunately, as large solar parks grew rapidly, the rooftop didn't pick up much space. Of the 40 gigawatt target, we've achieved less than 3% of rooftop solar. So I'll tell you briefly of how India, because India is known to have slow-moving projects, but in this one case, there's been a rapid increase in installation. They call it the plug-and-play model, in which the state government acquires the land, and usually it's non-arable land, and they classify it as wastelands, mostly common lands, which doesn't belong to private, to any individual. The state also takes care of all the ancillary infrastructure that is required for the energy produced to be given to the grid. And since climate change and renewable energy has been like the global talk of the town, a lot of venture capitalists were enthusiastic in investing in these parks. Banks were easy to give loans. And within a few years of this starting, solar prices dropped drastically. I think the lowest went was 2.44 rupees per unit compared to 5-6 rupees from coal. But you could say this 2.44 is heavily subsidized because of all these issues. This is just an overall idea of what it takes to build a solar park. Each megawatt requires about 5 to 7 acres of land. It's also quite water intensive because they're all mostly in arid or semi-arid regions. Even 1 gram of dust per meter square can reduce its efficiency by 40%. So each megawatt requires about between 7 to 20,000 liters per wash, which is typically done every week. And you have to use fresh water because hard water can leave deposits. So groundwater in these regions are fast depleting. In comparison, a coal power plant requires about 3,000 liters per megawatt hour. Every hour a coal plant operates, it requires about 3,000. So in comparison, solar is still less water intensive, but its location and its and since there are no regulations towards it, makes it quite difficult. So solar parks have been exempted from environmental impact assessments, which means you don't have to have public hearings. There are no studies on the social impacts of the project. There's no regulation of how much water can be used. Mostly these 3 acts are the only ones that control solar parks. And despite this growth, there's not been any long-term studies specific to India on what kind of impact solar parks have on the local ecology and the ground under it. In some studies say that in tropical countries like ours, solar parks can actually improve yield because of the shade it produces. But in India, solar parks they don't give access to farmers or pastoralists. Solar parks also have this problem of vegetation growing underneath. So if you allow pastoralists or shepherds or grazers to live, that takes care of the problem, but India locks up its solar parks. It's not, they're not given access to it. So I'll take one example of Pavagada Solar Park, which is about 200 kilometers north of Bangalore. It's spread over 13,000 acres, which is roughly about 50 square kilometers. And at the time it was completed, it was the largest in the world. So the compensation for this solar park was quite high. It's about 21,000 per acre per year with a 5% increase every year. So so invariably it's the upper caste who are usually the landowners. They get a lot of compensation, but it leaves out landless laborers. It leaves out pastoralists because they don't own land, so they're not compensated for their livelihoods. So in Karnataka, this was this thing. The government said we don't want to take land away from farmers, so they decided they'll lease it at this rate with a lease for 28 years. The first 25 years will be under government's land. The last 3 years, they will remove the panels and give it back to the farmers to ensure it's ready for agriculture. But if the farmer wants to continue leasing his land, he or she can work it out with individually. So when I went to Pavagada, this has been the general sentiment. It's a drought-prone area. The last few years have been quite difficult for farmers, and this has been quite a welcome news for most upper caste landowning farmers. But however, like I said before, it doesn't go back. The government doesn't consider non-property owners as victims of this project. And all this while, there was never a need to bore to get groundwater. People were doing farming, but now the rate is about 250 rupees per 5,000 liters. And there's absolutely no regulation. Anyone can take out how much of water they want. The main problem with solar parks is it cuts off the grazing routes for pastoral communities. So either they have to increase the distance they walk or just give up on their livelihoods, and they're not compensated for it. This is another example from Charanka, which is in Gujarat. It's just about 50 kilometers from the Pakistan border. Again, it's a very semi-arid region prone to a lot of droughts. It's relatively a small one. It's about 5,400 acres with a capacity of 750 megawatts. Here again, the farmers were compensated quite well, more than 2 lakhs per acre. But again, Maldharis or pastoralists were ignored. So since the park came up, there were about 100 families in Charanka, and each one had about 350 sheep and 10 cows. But 10 years later, only 20 families have any number of sheep. So solar parks is just the latest of the many developments that Gujarat has seen. If the mid 70s, it was all about protecting the Gir National Park, which was good, but again, it cut off access to Maldharis. They tell me they've been walking with the lions for ages now, and suddenly the government decides to cut their access to it. In the 90s and 2000s, it was all about highways and special economic zones, where land was given at dirt cheap prices, as low as 1 rupee per square meter. In 2019, the Lok Sabha was informed that half the land that was allotted and taken away remain unused, and Gujarat has a quarter of all unused acquired land in the country. Another photo. So this is Arjan Bhai's. It's very rare to see in north of India's pastoralists walk great distances. They walk about 9 months a year, and 3 months a year they come back to their base village. All along the way, they follow the rains so that the sheep can graze. And traditionally, they exchange the milk with farmers for either food, shelter. It was a barter system. But because of solar parks, they're not able to continue doing that. But on this rare occasion, I met Arjan Bhai. He and 50 of his family were walking with 3,000 sheep and 10 camels. And so I had asked him what all villages he had covered. And in the last 3 months, he listed out all the villages he's covered. And when I plotted out in Google Maps, it came to about 750 kilometers. And these are the women. It's very interesting because their clothes are also, everything about them is geared towards walking great distances. It's always layered so that when it gets hot, they can remove layers, or they can put it back when it gets too cold. They carry a lot of things on their turban so that it's easier to go. So when you take away livelihoods from people and not recognizing their social and ecological value, this is what happens. It's mostly women that get impacted. So when they don't have sheep, what they're forced to do is work as daily wage laborers and construction workers in neighboring villages. And this is what Rakuben told me, Malche to moboche. If one has animals, one has dignity. So she says that these were the same farm. Now she goes to the neighboring village, works as a landless laborer in a farmer. It's like the same farmer I could negotiate earlier with. I could I would negotiate my prices for the milk, but now I have to work under him. So there's a deep sense of loss in dignity and agency. In the pastoral community is quite, I'm not saying it's completely free of patriarchy, but most of the decision is made by the women. They choose which route to take, how much to sell for, who to sell. The men only go out and graze. And across the people I've spoken to, not one person disputed the fact that women run the family. They make all the decisions. But once they settle down and the sedentary communities, as they call it, the patriarchy seeps into their community, and this is what happens. Men get the entitlement to say that, entitlement to control women and what they do. So this is just two examples from what's happening in the country. And this is just the beginning. India has increased its target to 500 gigawatts by 2030. If India reaches the 60 gigawatts target of solar parks, about 1,200 square kilometers will be under land, and that's more than the area of Chennai metropolitan development area, the larger Chennai metropolitan area. So yeah, that's in brief what I wanted to say. Thanks. I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
I have a question. In Tamil Nadu, because you are talking about impact on pastoral communities, where would this impact see in a place like Tamil Nadu? Where would you see this adverse impact really showing up?
In Tamil Nadu, the scenario is quite different because it's a highly urbanized state, and there are, in comparison to northern states, there's not many common grounds here. So it's mostly private property that the government compensates for. Again, water use gets diverted to cleaning these solar parks.
Why is air part of the excluded?
Air?
No, there was this water, air, and
The laws, yeah. They just added it. There's no reason for them to add. So in this photo, you could see solar panels on the left, and on the right, it's a protected forest. So
1 rupee per square
meter. So the government thinks it's easy to divert this land because there's no agriculture in it. You don't have to give compensation, and mainly there's public sympathy. No one's going to protest, or no one's going to say you're taking away revenue land or whatever. And this idea of wastelands came from the British, where any land that doesn't give revenue to them is considered wasteland. But that completely ignores the needs of pastoral communities. One way to solve this issue is to increase the height of the solar panel so that farming and grazing can continue underneath, but that increases the cost of construction quite significantly because it has to be wind resistant and more concrete to be used. Yeah.
Solar panels for water pumping. This scheme, you were a scheme for agriculture, both wells and open wells. We have a set of panels. There was a 5-year guarantee. So ours lasted till 5 years, but mostly went away. The panels are alright, but the VFDs and everything has just gone. Now there are just panels lying around in many farms actually. Because each VFD to replace and everything is about 30,000-40,000, and with electricity and so is there any in your research anything to connect these sort of subsidies that are given, and the panels are still there? There is some scope for energy production which is capped and it is not taking away one. That we don't see anything back from the government.
Yeah, see, when it comes to rooftop or individual solar panels, there's a larger issue of how do you dispose them. But here I've focused only on large parks that take away so much land. Each megawatt, like I said, requires 5 to 7 acres. But when it comes to individual, I think the reason why rooftops are not being encouraged, where its growth has been less than 10%, is because it doesn't attract the kind of investments from corporates and venture capitalists as compared to solar parks. And also the initial capital cost of solar rooftops is quite high, so everyone can't afford that, even if it pays itself off, say, in 7 to 10 years.
Have you integrated, I mean, we are sort of still a very energy hungry economy. So what about the other sources like hydro or wind? Are these feasible, or do they again like this have their own unintended or intended adverse effects?
See, anything that's centralized will tend to have adverse impacts. But like I said, the growth of solar parks has been 1,500%. But the overall, if you remove solar parks from the equation, the growth of renewable energy has been only 80%. So for a just transition, I think you need to diversify your sources of energy rather than putting all your eggs in one basket.
But they don't get any impact with the agreement they said. If they don't meet, they don't pay. Just something they say.
Sorry?
No, they said that by 2030 they'll be meeting these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they don't meet, will they face any consequences?
No, it's a global commitment. There are no it's not a strong, it's a soft law. They fell, I think at the end of last year, they fell short about 30%, but still you could see the graph, it's been quite a quick raise. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry?
So the increase that they're showing is between
2014 and 2023. Yeah. The y-axis is the megawatts.
Thanks for the great presentation. Solar energy was supposed to be decentralized energy production. That was one of the promises of solar. From there, how did we reach here? This is totally centralized. These huge solar parks, as centralized as anything else. So what can be done about this? I mean, in terms of policy directions, is there any way that it can be made actually decentralized?
Yeah, diversify and invest more in rooftop. There were a lot of subsidies for rooftop installation by the center, but it still proved to be too expensive for individuals to go ahead. There has been some growth in institutional solar rooftops, but not enough to make an impact. And also the idea of using renewables at the Paris Agreement, India didn't say they would reduce coal power. In fact, emissions from energy sector, despite this growth, has been increasing at a rapid rate. And again, in 2016, they opened up commercial mining to private players. It was nationalized before that. And domestic coal is one of the worst. It creates the highest amount of fly ash compared to imported coal. So in many developed countries, renewable energies replace coal energy. But in India, given the growing economy and given that there's still demand, the center looks at it as two parallel growths instead of one cancelling out each other. But I feel there's definitely no more room for coal to be around because a lot of it is subsidized and the environmental and the social cost of it is not being considered.
Yeah, so one question I had is, is the government, they must be giving it out to private companies to take up the projects?
So the state government will identify the land. They'll acquire the land by whatever means it's required. It's mostly wasteland, so there's no acquisition at all. If there are landowning farmers, then they give a really nice incentive to take the land. And then they set up all the ancillary infrastructure.
But the government themselves do it, or?
Yeah, the government. So the companies just have to come and plug in their solar panels. That's about it.
Right.
So most of this is in Gujarat and Karnataka, I think, based on your...
No, it's in northern India. It's higher because there are more common lands.
Right.
So it's across Gujarat, Rajasthan. Maldharis actually in the old world, before the national boundaries were drawn, they extend up to Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and all of that. But the solar parks are coming mostly in Western India, northwestern India.
So have any of the pastoralist communities been able to challenge or legally challenge any of the acquisitions, or there's no
No,
scope
there's
of
not
it because
been
it's all
much.
common land?
In Gujarat, there was a group. There is a group called Marag, which is trying to challenge this. So in 2017, they did a study. In the 1980s, the state government set the norm is for every 100 animals, you need 16 hectares of land. But a 2017 study said there was a 65% shortage in grazing lands. In 2022, it increased to 78%. So the land available for grazing has been drastically reduced.
Karthikeyan.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just was wondering what is with the maintenance of these solar parks? Like, are they something which get started and like are the state governments maintaining them, or after a point, like how does it work? What is the sustainability of like in terms of how much power they generate and things like that? So.
In terms of water usage,
No, I'm not. I'm saying, like, for example, these solar parks have been started and the panels installed. What is their lifetime like, and are they maintained or not maintained?
it's usually about 25 years.
Oh.
So we still don't know what we're going to do after 25 years when the life of solar panels is done.
And are there any big companies manufacturing them, or is like the manufacturing lies in the hands of small people?
No, most of our solar panels come from China. China has invested a lot in research and development of solar panels. So in 2018, local domestic solar manufacturers actually told the government to tax Chinese products more than that. So most of these, the production of solar panels is still with large companies, and mostly outside of India.
One is supposed to be set up in Ramanathapuram.
Okay.
Because if you see the heat map of India, I think apart from Gujarat, Rajasthan, the one place where probably the highest wattage of power which could be generated was Ramanathapuram area. And I think there was a huge talk about setting up a huge plant by Adani.
Okay.
Solar plants actually. I do not know if there is any of it.
I'm not familiar with it, but that stretch is known for its windmills. Tamil Nadu.
No, that is Kayathar and Aralvaimuri. That is when you come from Tirunelveli area and then towards Ramanathapuram, you have that.
Okay.
That had its own problems. Like when they installed that windmills, because agricultural land again has to be taken on lease, or the land price skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And people are not able to afford it.
Correct.
But that's a different thing.
Sure.
But this I heard that Ramanathapuram is one area which, apart from Gujarat and Rajasthan, can actually give you the return of wattage in terms of power. Actually.
But Tamil Nadu doesn't have that much common lands as you would see in these.
Maybe fragmented, probably.
Yeah, that's fine. So thank you for your time. Hope that was useful.